Narges Nematollahi. He's a PhD student. He's crazy enough to get 2 doctoral degrees in linguistics and Iranian studies. She is a wonderful assistant of mine, and I'm very proud to be here presenting one of our own students. She's going to talk about have progressive in Farsi, a case of pattern replication. We would like to request that you turn off the sound of your telephones in case you have forgotten that, so we don't distract the speakers here. Please welcome Ms. Nematollahi. Join me, please.
So I'm very glad to present my work on have progressives in modern Persian, a case of pattern replication. So modern Persian has recently developed a progressive construction that is used to express the progressive aspect. In this construction, we use the auxiliary verb to have. This construction is still limited to spoken variety of Farsi, and it has not yet fully integrated into literary Persian. But what is the construction like? We use the auxiliary verb have, and then the main verb. Both the auxiliary and the main verb get inflection for person and number, and we have present progressive and past progressive. So in present progressive, we have the present stem of both the auxiliary and the main verb, and in past progressive, we have the past stem of the main verb and the auxiliary. So for example, people are coming, آدم‌ها دارند میآیند, and we were eating dinner, داشتیم شام می‌خوردیم. Now, first, as I said, it has been recently developed in Farsi, and first reports on half progressive goes back to 1888, where Zhukovsky in a very short paper introduces these forms, and he quotes 2 forms. In Tehrani dialects, he mentions a form like dare miraqse, he is dancing, and in a dialect near Isfahan, he quotes daru yue. So we see that already back then we have had these forms in many dialects of Iran, in the standard variety and in a dialect near Isfahan. Then Mehraban and Brown in 1897, they record 2 forms of this construction. They narrate a story in the Gabri dialect that was spoken by the Zoroastrians of Kerman. So they have this form in the Gabri dialect, Doren o Charen, they are gazing for the cows, and they translate the same story into standard variety, and we see the same form in the standard variety as well. And then first attestation of this construction in literary works goes back to 1907, that it appeared in a series of satirical essays of newspapers written by Deh Khoda, and we have 2 forms, a present progressive form and a past progressive form. So back then we see that this form, at least as far as we can understand from these records, has been diffused in many dialects of Iran. Now, there are semantic and syntactic peculiarities about this construction. As far as semantic is concerned, for example, if we look at Bybee et al. 1994 study of progressive in various language families, we see that none of those languages use the auxiliary verb possessive have to express their progressive aspect. So, for example, if we look at some Indo-European languages, English, French, Italian, and also some Iranian languages, Tajik and Dari, none of them use the auxiliary verb have for their progressive aspect. And as far as syntax is concerned, it is peculiar that both the auxiliary and the main verb are finite forms. So, for example, in other periphrastic constructions in Persian, only the auxiliary verb gets a finite form, and then the main verb is either participial or infinitive. But in this construction, both the auxiliary and the main verb are finite forms. 3 proposals for the origin of half progressives have been made. One of them is Pistoso 1974 and Shokri 2015. They say that this form was borrowed from a northern language in Iran. This northern language is called Mazandarani, and they say that in Mazandarani we have a form like derme, keme, I am doing, and they say that this has been borrowed into standard variety of Persian through Mazandarani, this northern dialect. Another proposal is by Jeremias 1993 that traces back these constructions to classical Persian. She says that we have had this construction with have in classical Persian, but that marked the perfect tense in classical Persian. So she gives an account how the perfect tense has been developed to express the progressive aspect. And in a study of mine in 2014, I suggested that a serial verb construction in colloquial Persian, the first verb of which is bardashtan, to set off, can be considered as the source of this half progressive. So in these three proposals, the first proposal suggests a contact-induced change in language, and the second and the third proposal motivate an internal account for this construction in modern Persian. Now, to give an idea about this northern dialect, here, this is the map of Iran, and here is the province Mazandarani, and you see that it is very close to Tehran geographically. So what they say is that this construction was there in Mazandarani language here, and then the Tehrani people got that from the people who spoke Mazandarani, and then from the standard variety of Tehran, this construction got diffused in many other dialects under the influence of the standard variety. Now, the purpose of this study is to elaborate on the first proposal that I call the northern influence hypothesis, because neither Pistoso nor Shokri actually explicitly say what they mean by this process and how was the process look like. So I try to elaborate on the first proposal in the light of recent resources and theories in contact linguistics, particularly in the model of pivot matching in Matres and Sakel 2007, and then to identify the strengths and weaknesses of this hypothesis. So to this end, I looked at the progressive aspect in many Iranian dialects. My two sources were one, a descriptive dictionary of linguistic varieties in Iran that had represent 143 dialects and languages, and typology of Iranian languages that had studied 16 languages or group of languages. When I looked at the progressive aspect the strategies that different Iranian dialects and languages used to express progressive aspect, I found 8 different strategies to mark the progressive. 7 of them are not of great importance for our study. One of them is in fact actually half progressive, that is in Persian and its varieties, as well as in many other dialects. Some languages spoken in Iran don't have any distinct morphology to mark progressive. Some others use fixed words like kharik in some Kurdish languages and the infinitive of the main verb, and also some more strategies to mark the progressive. What is important for this study was a group of languages in central Iran and in Mazandarani dialects that use be progressive or locative be progressive. So they use either be or locative be as the auxiliary, and then they have the main verb. Locative be, I mean, some languages and dialects make distinction between the copula and the locative be. So if they want to say I am a student, they use a form of copula different from if they want to say I am in the library. So for locative be, they have a different copula than be. Now, 2 examples of this, for example, in Suleiman Abadi, which is a Mazandarani dialect, a dialect of the Mazandarani language, they uses the locative be as the auxiliary, and here is the locative be. Daba, which is the ending for person, and then they use the main verb. So as you can see here also we have both the auxiliary and the main verb get inflection for person and number, and but the auxiliary that they use is locative be. Now, if we look at the present form of this locative be, we see that it is dar, and the present form of the verb have is dar in Farsi. So you see a phonological similarity between the present stem of locative be in these dialects and the present stem of have in Persian. So, for example, in a sentence, where is my child, they use the locative be in the present stem. Now, if we look fully into if we look the progressive paradigm in a Mazandarani dialect, we see that they have present progressive and past progressive. In present progressive, they use the locative be, which is dar, together with the endings for person and number, and then the main verb. And in past progressive, they have the past tense of the auxiliary, the locative be with the ending, and then the main verb with the ending. So present progressive and past progressive in a Mazandarani dialect. Now, before I elaborate on the process of pattern replication that happened between Mazandarani, supposedly happened between Mazandarani and Tehrani dialect, I explain about the model that Matres and Sakel, 2007, suggest for a process of pattern replication. They say that first, the bilingual identifies a pivotal feature of the model construction in the modal language. So modal language here is Mazandarani. After the bilingual identifies a pivotal feature, he looks for an appropriate matching construction in the replica language. Replica language here is Persian. And when he looks for an appropriate matching construction in the replica language, these are based on semantic similarities, morphosyntactic similarities, or phonological similarities. Matres and Sakel say that semantic similarity is the most active force. Then we have morphosyntactic similarity, and for phonological similarity, they say that it is marginal. Yet, they say that it has been attested in the pivot matching processes. So when the bilingual looks for an appropriate matching construction in the replica language, what are the most active forces for him or her is semantic similarities or morphosyntactic similarities. But still, phonological similarity can drive this process as well. Now, going back to the northern influence hypothesis, we can say that the process was like that. Some bilinguals of the northern dialect and Persian started to replicate the construction that they had in Mazandarani into Farsi. So the northern language is the model language and Persian is the replica language. In order to do that, they reanalyzed the auxiliary dar in the northern language, which was locative B, as dar in replica language, which was the present stem of have. So what happened here was that the locative B progressive in Mazandarani changed to have progressive in Persian. Then have progressives in Persian was taken on by monolinguals of Persian and was extended to past tense too. Because if you look at this picture, so in Mazandarani we have present progressive with dar and then the main verb, and it is phonologically similar to the present stem of have in Persian. So what happened was pattern replication between present progressive of Mazandarani into present progressive of Persian. But then if you look at the past tense, there is no phonological similarities between these two. So there is no way that the Persian speakers could get this form from the Mazandarani. So what happened then, we hypothesized that the monolinguals of Persian tried to extend this construction to past tense. So they made the past tense form themselves. So they see that in present stem they have the auxiliary verb to have and the main verb. So they extended to the past stem of auxiliary verb have and the main verb. Now, there are some doubts about this hypothesis. First, the probability of borrowing from a small this form into have, they reanalyze the auxiliary verb to have as their auxiliary verb locative be. And then for past tense, they extended their present progressive into past tense. Because as I said, there is no phonological similarity in the past tense form of this progressive construction. Now, if we look at the diachronic data from Mazandarani, first we see that a selection of poems of Amir Pazvari, who was a poet written in Mazandarani in the 18th century, it doesn't show any record of the periphrastic progressive form. So we don't have any record of this progressive form in his selection of poems. But in a Mazandarani text written in 1889, we see two cases of progressive forms. And interestingly, one of these cases uses the auxiliary verb locative be, and one of them uses the auxiliary verb have. So the present progressive form uses the auxiliary verb locative be, so dare mirne, he is dying, and the past progressive form uses the auxiliary verb have, dashte shie. Now, if we look at our alternative hypothesis, this hypothesis can explain well why we have a present form with locative be progressive, but past tense, past progressive with have, because it shows the stage of borrowing. Yes. Stage of borrowing when the Mazandarani people got the form from Persian in present progressive, but they have not extended the form into past progressive yet. So for their present progressive, they use this newly developed form in their language, but for past tense, they still use the form from Persian. So if we want to see the weaknesses and strength of Northern influence hypothesis, we can say that Northern influence hypothesis is more typologically sound because it assumes a locative be progressive as the original one, and it is something that we see in many languages. And then it says that the have progressive was borrowed or was under the influence of locative be progressive. So in this case, Northern influence hypothesis is more typologically sound. But the problem with this hypothesis is that first we need some social, strong social factors to justify this borrowing, and also the diachronic data from Mazandarani, as far as I can tell, it doesn't support this Northern influence hypothesis. So if our main question is what the source of have progressive in Persian is, I think this hypothesis perhaps cannot explain, and we need some more data and some more investigation to find out what the source of this construction was. Thank you so much for your.
I suggest that we could either wait for the questions, wait till the end of the session, or start right now. Okay. All right. I am sure that there are plenty of questions. Fantastic. Very good.
Thank you so much.
Very proud of it. I'm sure that people have questions. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much for this very interesting talk. I agree with the contact hypothesis because, as you said, in many languages, including English and other Western Germanic languages, locative is the source for the progressive aspect. But I didn't really understand the social factors that you automatically ruled out. You said that there is not really much evidence that, concerning the directionality of contact. So what arguments do you have against the Northern influence hypothesis from a sociolinguistic point of view?
So I myself didn't look into the social factors. I only suggested that if they say that it was a borrowing from a smaller local language into standard variety, they need some strong social factors that motivate this.
Yeah.
So for example,
there are usually there are cases where actually minority groups start language change. So that's why I wanted to ask you what sort of arguments you have against this, in particular, like from historical sociolinguistic point of view. But you said you haven't looked into that.
Yes,
okay.
I haven't looked into that.
Yeah, I have a very small question. That in Persian, do you have any constructions with this have, where have is used as a locative? In colloquial Persian, any? So that could be the source of that, if there are constructions, maybe frozen constructions, where have is used to indicate where a person is or where a person belongs to, something like that.
Yes, but as far as I can tell now, we don't have such usage of the verb. It is possessive have, but we have so many compound verbs with have. So we might find something there. And my proposal for the source of that was a compound verb with have. But yes.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you.
Next question.
And just following up on that, like something like iqamat dashtn, like the compound verbs, you can probably find cases where it is like that. But I'm more interested in what was missing. At least I didn't see it in these Mazandarani dialects. How is possessive have expressed? Because also typologically we know that a lot of languages express possession with locative be.
Yes.
So, yeah.
I researched into how they express possessive, and what was interesting for me was that they don't use the verb to dashtan. So their possessive is different from our possessive verb.
Okay.
But
Do they use the locative be for possession at all?
I don't know. But
Because that's very important, because then basically the logic of the argument kind of is lost, I think, if that's the case, because then you can just argue, well, it's really, again, the possession that's being used in Mazandarani, and in standard Persian, it's just the equivalent form of possession that is used. So you're
So-
missing a piece of that puzzle if that's the case.
So you mean in the process of replication, it was the semantic similarity between the possessive, between the locative be and
Or
the
in other
possessive.
words, maybe there was no contact issue even. Like, how do we know if it's because of the contact that this is happening?
But cross-linguistically, it is not attested that languages use the possessive have to mark the progressive.
True, yeah. But I mean, in terms of understanding that direction, I think this is an important piece. And also, what I don't remember from the typology in the progressive, is it the locative be that's used in progressive? Because I think it's actually the regular be that's typically used in the progressive.
In Baibi et
expression.
al., they look at several languages, and I found both locative
Oh,
be
both.
and
Okay.
copula.
So
to
then
mark
it's
the
really
progressive.
interesting that there is, sorry, this is the last thing I'm going to say. This is really interesting because it's a bit surprising that you can't find it across languages. The fact that possessive have and locative be are so closely connected across languages, then it's a real mystery why, when it comes to the progressive, you shouldn't find possessive have when you find locative be, right? So this is, I guess, the puzzle I'll leave you with.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, maybe
So, yes,
I'm
can.
glad you know.
Sorry.
I think there's a question here.
So,
You raise your hand, I think.
yeah, okay. So, Guiti Shukri's Mazandarani documentation project shows that, if I'm not misrepresenting her work, that Mazandarani, Ziyarat Mazandarani, actually borrowed dashtan from Persian, and uses it for possession, but they also have still remnants of the old be copula, not locative be copula possessives. So as far as I remember, I can look later on my data, but they do not have daran, like the locative copula used for possession, which is very weird. And across Indo-Iranian, actually, we very rarely find the non-locative copula used for locatives or the locative copula used for possession, which to me is very surprising given all the possessors are locations. But that's what we actually find. As for the other question, I think a lot of smaller regional languages in Iran use daran, the locative copula, in some way to mark the progressive. So Gilaki, for example, uses it in a slightly modified construction and so on. So it's a very common
But they don't
pattern.
use both in the conjugated form.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
in Rashti, for example, they use infinitive. It was one of the strategies that they
Yeah,
used.
infinitive.
But I left it out because the syntax doesn't work with what we have in Persian.
Yeah, but exactly this type of everyone comes to Tehran for whatever, speaking their own languages and then using Persian to communicate across communities. This is exactly the social context that you maybe need to have this construction borrowed.
But apart from that phonological similarity, Matres and Sakel mention only one case, and they even for that case they put doubt on that a phonological similarity can be the driving force for. So for example, if they wanted to borrow, they would take something similar to locative be, not the form that is phonologically similar.
So there is a paper, I can't remember the year, by Jeffrey Heath, I think, where he cites a lot of cases where things are either borrowed or have been contracted to a situation where you can't really know what their source is, and then he calls it hermit crab morphology, where they build upon it. It was, I think, the 80s sometime in language, which seems to me to be exactly this case, which is pretty cool, so thank you.
I didn't know these languages. At the same time, I heard that you said have one plane of expression expresses two plane of contents. am I right? Have as a complete, have as a process. Is it possible, or is it is depend on the constituents of the words, surrounding words of this to have?
So you are suggesting that have can be used for two.
No, you said. I probably I didn't quote rightly because I don't know these languages.
I only looked at
Is it sounded in such a way that to have is used for progressive and for process, and at the same time it is used for complete things, actions, no?
at least cross-linguistically, when we look at progressive strategies to mark progressive aspects, it's not the verb to have, possessive have, that is used. And in no languages that they looked at, the possessive have was used to mark the progressive. So cross-linguistically, it has not been attested, but we can think of why we had used possessive have to mark progressive.
Thank you very much.
It seems to me that this presentation here is really thought-provoking and it needs some work, and everybody is opinion on that. I had a few things to suggest along the same lines. I think it seems to me it's really difficult to see that a small language could really influence a larger group of people. And I would also look into maybe other Iranian languages. You did mention in 8 cases, Kurdish has one. You mentioned, yes. You might look into other dialects to see if that happens in, Kurmanji, other dialect. And maybe Baluchi and Pashtun. I don't know if you looked into them to see, does this exist in those Iranian languages too? Maybe then you could come up with a better, explanation, or we could come up with a better explanation. Let us put our hand to you. Fantastic.
Thank you very much.